Today we're going to change it up a little bit and review some themes from this unit in preparation for your test coming up. The first theme we're going to look at is just generally empires, what they are, how they work. Remember, the definition of empire in this classical period in history is a large state that expands by conquering other states, is ruled centrally by an emperor, I do that every time, is ruled centrally by an emperor, and rules over diverse populations because it's full of different kinds of people that they've conquered. Empires, as we've seen, follow patterns. And one of those patterns involves just like how they rise, why empires that succeed tend to succeed, and why empires tend to fall. If you're interested in a full overview of this model, this is actually called the Konrad Demarest model of empires, but for our purposes, today I just want to go over characteristics of well-run empires and why empires fall. As we've seen through our study of Persia and India, China, and Rome, empires, when they are successful, do a number of things. First, they take care of infrastructure. They build roads and transportation systems like canals and ports. These are super important because they allowed trade to increase. It makes it easier to move around the empire for traders, but also for soldiers to move around the empire to keep things protected and safe. In Rome, they built the Roman roads all over Europe. China famously built a pretty great wall and a pretty important canal to help with movement of goods and materials. So as a result of this, trade increases. Well-run empires also have cosmopolitan cities. That means like diverse, vibrant, educated, cultured cities, like Rome. They have effective bureaucracies to ensure communication, collect taxes, oversee coinage, and ensure that the emperor's laws are enforced. All of the classical empires that we've studied developed really strong bureaucracies. One of them developed an extra unique form of bureaucracy called a meritocracy. That was the Han Dynasty, and it was called a meritocracy because you had to earn or merit your position by passing a test. Well-run empires function with a common official language like Latin in Rome. They impose a system of justice or law for the entire empire, and they have some sense of citizenship or rights to some degree for people they conquer. As a result, empires tend to get rich. Sometimes, in good times like the Pax Romana, they experience long periods of stability and prosperity, and populations increase. However, we also saw that within every empire are the seeds of its own destruction, right? As empires get bigger, they weaken themselves. When empires fall, it's usually because of four major reasons. One, failure of leadership. Leaders start focusing on their own wealth instead of the needs of the state. You can call this corruption. Two, when they've reached the limit of expansion and conquest, when they can't do it anymore, then what? Overstretching the bureaucracy, the military resources, and communications to defend a border that has overexpanded tends to weaken empires pretty fast. Similarly, without new conquests, there's not extra like looted money coming in. So inside the empire, the economy weakens too. All of these things weaken an empire to make them prime targets for rebellions from within, like the peasant uprising in Han Dynasty, or challenges from without, like barbarian invasions. So that was theme one, empires. I apologize, the PowerPoint isn't as cute as I like, but it's 2020 and things are crazy. Okay, theme number two, hierarchy, right? How has power and wealth been divided in these societies? We saw that classical societies developed hierarchies based on what kind of work a person did. Like, were they bureaucrats in the government, or were they peasant farmers? Hierarchies also factored in family lineage, especially for the upper class. Remember, in Rome, in order to be in the very upper class, you had to be related to one of the original families that founded Rome. And finally, gender. And this is a theme throughout most, if not all, of world history. Patriarchy. Men had power, women did not. As always, these social hierarchies were reflected in the political and legal systems of classical societies. Like, the law protects the power structures as they are because the people with power make the laws, right? Makes sense. For example, even though classical Athens and the Roman Republic were democracies, which is pretty amazing for the time, still only free male citizens could vote. So if you were a slave, if you were a woman, out of luck. In the Roman Republic, the social hierarchy divided people into 3 different classes. The aristocracy, which is like the rich people who were related to those families that can trace their lineage all the way back to the founding of Rome, whose wealth and power comes from their family name and from land ownership. Commoners, like, artisans, workers, and slaves. Slaves had no rights. These divisions were reflected in the political system. So the aristocrats had the most political power and slaves had none. Remember, when we're talking about slavery here, we're not talking about like the race-based system of slavery that is tragically familiar to us in America. That hadn't quite been developed yet. We also learned about belief systems that in some cases reinforced social hierarchy, so like supported that rigid division of society into classes, like Hinduism with its caste system, where you could literally not move up in class until you died and were reborn, and only if you had good karma. And Confucianism with its ideas about filial piety and being really submissive to people who are your superiors and listening to those above you. Both of these ideas, the first is a religion, the second is a secular philosophy, reinforced the social hierarchies that existed in their societies, India and China respectively. We also, however, saw the rise of 2 ideas that at first challenged hierarchy, that resisted the way that society divided power and wealth. And both of those ideas were universalizing religions, Buddhism and Christianity. Buddhism challenged the idea of the Hindu caste system by saying anybody can achieve enlightenment if they follow the right way of living in this lifetime. You don't have to wait to die and be reborn in order to achieve it. Christianity initially was a religion of rebellion against the Roman Empire and the corruption that had taken place in Judea, as was seen by the founder of that religion back then. In both of these cases, however, as the religion spread and began to become institutionalized, so after the founder died and the religion began to intermix with like the levers of power, right? Both of these religions kind of solidified into a form that ended up supporting hierarchy. Buddhism, especially in China, mixed with ideas of Confucianism, and it stopped being this like egalitarian sort of philosophy. Christianity, as we will see in the next unit, when it formed in a church in Europe, that church adopted the rigid social structure of Rome, actually, and kind of just replicated it in the church. So you had a hierarchy of officials in the church, women had no power, etc. If you want to pause the video here and take some time to look at the slide, it would definitely be worth your time, because here I have kind of combined systems of government and ideologies so that you guys can kind of see how they interplay. I'm going to start with the column on the left, right? We started with empires because most of the civilizations that we've studied were empires. Empires are ruled centrally with one emperor in power, so they are autocratic. The empire says what to do and everybody has to do it. Emperors claim legitimacy based on usually some religious basis for political power. Like, I get to tell you what to do because our religion supports that idea and you believe that religion, basically. right? Like the Mandate of Heaven in the Han Dynasty is a great example of this. And empires tend to promote ideologies and philosophies that promote faith and obedience, right? Because if you're the one person in charge and what you say goes, you want people to faithfully obey you, right? Confucianism is a great example. It emphasizes social order by promoting filial piety, obedience to one's superiors, who in turn must act rightly and set a good fatherly example. The caste system in India is a good other example of how philosophies that promote faith and obedience can really promote like stable empires, right? Based on Hindu ideas about karma and reincarnation and fulfilling your obligation to your caste in order to be able to move up in caste in your next life. That's an idea that promotes a lot of stability. It doesn't promote a lot of resistance or rebellion. These ideologies and philosophies are also collective. They are based on harmonizing society as a whole and society's needs over the individual person's needs. They are rigid social hierarchies, so there's no way to move up in class. And there's some benefits and downsides if you're a ruler of one of these empires, right? The benefits would be it's easier to rule a society of people who just follow your orders on faith. It's easy to make decisions fast, especially in an emergency. But the downsides, as we saw in Rome with emperors that were terrible, if the ruler has bad ideas, everyone's in trouble. Moving to the column on the right. We've seen two examples of democracy or limited government in the classical period, ancient Athens and Rome when it was a republic. In both of these cases, legitimacy, or the right to rule, political power, came from voting citizens. One ideology and philosophy that was really unique for its time period arose in Athens, appropriately in a democracy, and it was called Greek rationalism. It's the philosophy that argues that people can use their own reason and logic to understand the world and solve problems. You don't have to rely on faith in somebody else's judgment. You don't have to rely on faith that it's the gods that can explain everything. You can observe your world and reason through it and make decisions that way. This philosophy promoted debate, discussion, and questioning because the main idea is that you should question your assumptions. Don't just believe what you were told. Question things, debate, get to a good idea collectively. It promotes independent critical thinking because the whole idea is not to accept what you are told on blind faith. You have to think for yourself. So it leads to a more individualist kind of philosophy in society, and one that works pretty well for democracies, where you have groups who collectively have to work together to discuss, to come up with a good solution. Societies like this sometimes allow some social mobility. Back in the classical period, social mobility or the ability to move up in class was rare. Ancient Athens was a good example where like you could be born poor, and if you showed political promise, you could end up a politician, but that was the exception to the rule for sure. Benefits. Questioning and debate can prevent people with power from making terrible decisions. It's good to question your assumptions. It's fine to be wrong and admit it. That's actually way better than like stubbornly sticking to a bad idea. However, democracies, as we've seen, can be really slow to act. Too much individual thinking also, without the logic that you need to do it right, can cause huge problems for everyone. And I think the time of recording, December 2020, we have seen that in our own lives. Wear your masks, people. All right, final theme, changing continuity. This is something that historians think about a lot. What changes? What's different? And continuity, what stays the same over long periods of time? Taking the fall of Rome for a great example of a huge, obvious, big change in history, one that was sufficient actually to get us to call what happens next a totally different time period. When Rome fell, as you can see on the map on the left, first government changed. In Western Europe, in place of the one Roman Empire, you had multiple independent, small, warring kingdoms develop out of like those different barbarian tribe invasions. In the process, Roman culture got completely lost. That means the language, Latin, wasn't spoken anymore. Nobody speaks Latin anymore. The learning, the specialized knowledge, gone. The culture that Rome was able to sustain because it had all of the money that it had was gone in Europe. Standards of living tanked. The economy tanked. The economy changed, actually. It didn't even use coins like actual money anymore. Instead, they moved into an economy that involved trading services for a place to live and a place to, stuff to eat, called feudalism. We'll get to it. So huge changes in Europe. But that doesn't mean that everything changed. And it's important to keep track of things that stay the same over long periods of time so we can ask, like, why? Continuities, then, included the religious tradition. Astoundingly, especially given the way that Christianity started, Christianity endured in Europe long after the fall of Rome. So even after all of these European states were independent from each other, were broken into different little places, right? They shared the same basic religious tradition. Another huge continuity in history that spans most of the time periods we talk about is patriarchy. For almost all of history, and I'm saying almost, kind of hopefully, because it's not a given yet, men have had the positions of power in society and have often treated women like property. So that was your review of themes from the classical period. Next.